Hey guys, welcome to Mitch's Vinyl Corner and thanks for stopping by. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite, if not my favorite, solo artist of all time, Neil Young. Going to go really deep into his catalog of pretty much what I have from his most prolific period. Now, Neil Young's most prolific period is, I think you can ask any fan or any critic, it's going to be from the late 60s into the late 1970s, maybe even into like 1980 time frame. From anything after that, it's really a mixed bag. Neil Young had a really experimental period in the 1980s. He did He experimented with electronic music, rockabilly, just like kind of twangy country, blues, synth. I mean, it was kind of a weird period for Neil Young. Although there are a couple gems within that time frame, I just don't have any of them on vinyl. Um, but from like 1989 until about 1995 was deemed like coming like his comeback period. You had the album Freedom, Ragged Glory, Harvest Moon, Mirror Ball, Sleep with Angels. Like that was a really good time frame for Neil Young. But unfortunately, I don't have any of those on vinyl either. Um, those ones are starting to come out as part of his original release series. I don't think any of them, minus Harvest Moon, from what I've seen. All of those are just within the box sets that are coming out. None of them are just individual. Um, Anything post that up until now is a really mixed bag, and I don't mean that with any ill intent or anything. It's just it it's a really mixed bag. That's the best way to describe it. There's definitely hits or misses um, in this time frame. He started getting extremely political with a lot of his albums, like just solely political based albums, like Greendale, um, the Monsanto years, Living with War, Americana. Like, there's just, I understand when an artist has political elements within their music, and I'm totally for it. However, when it's just consistently one sided, regardless of which side of the fence that you're on politically, I'm not going to get political here. It can definitely get very tiresome, and maybe a little bit too preachy. A lot of his stuff from his most prolific period is politically charged and based, but it kind of doesn't. It doesn't get too preachy, if that kind of makes sense. At least that's how I take it. Um, but again, Neil Young, my favorite solo artist. Yeah, there's nothing else to be said about it. So before I get into his own catalog, I wanted to bring out a couple um, of his stuff from Buffalo Springfield and Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young. So these two time periods are really interesting for Neil Young. So Buffalo Springfield was the band that he was with for about I think it's from 65 to about 68. Um, Stephen Stills, who would later be part of Crosby, Stills and Nash, was also in this band. Buffalo Springfield is really known for their big hit, "For What It's Worth." I think everybody's heard that song, especially if you've seen any movies based in the 1960s or Forrest Gump. It's in there. This is a really good album. This is a retrospective, has all of their hits from this time frame. It's a really good album. If you really want to really dive into post Neil Young's solo career, this is really good to have. The next one is So Far. Now, this is the collection of pretty much all the big hits that he had with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which they would become Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. This has Ohio, Wooden Ships, pretty much all the big CSNY hits that you've heard on the radio. So this is really essential. This was released, I think, in 74, 75. So pretty much the big hit period for those four. So you can find this anywhere, pretty cheap. It's really good to have. So going into Neil Young's catalog in general, it's extremely extensive. I just pointed out I went through the different eras. He changes musical genres pretty much at the drop of a dime. Post 70s, from the 60s to the 70s, he was pretty consistent with kind of like his musical flow and like musical genre. But again, his archives are extremely extensive, and if you're really into the archive, like outtake stuff, like I highly recommend the Archives Volume 1 and 2. It was on hold for at least, I think, 10 or 20 years. I think the first one was released in 2009, and Volume 2, I think, was released in 2021. I have both of them. I just have them digitally on my computer. Really, really good stuff. A lot of really deep cuts, a lot of alternate takes, a lot of stuff that was never released. A lot of the bootleg albums that were talked about for years, like Chrome Dreams, Homegrown, which I actually do have on vinyl. I'll show you guys in a bit. But again, it's a very extensive catalog, and it can get kind of overwhelming for some people. But I'm going to start and mainly focus on his most celebrated, both from commercially and critically, which would be the late 60s into the early 1980s. So the first album we're going to talk about is his debut album. I believe this was from 1968 or early 1969. This is right after he left Buffalo Springfield. Young's kind of trying to find out like kind of what works for him. There's some orchestral tracks on here, which, yeah, kind of not my cup of tea. A lot of it mainly is all acoustic tracks. There's a couple electric ones. Last Trip to Tulsa is pretty much the standout on here. That's a really, really good song. Not essential, if I could be honest. Good to have. Kind of like shows you like kind of what Neil Young would actually like, become as he grew as an artist, as a solo artist. Couple key tracks on here, but nothing that really like stands out like, oh my god, I gotta have this album. But me, I'm a serious Neil Young collector, so I gotta have it. So not bad, but not essential. So the next one is the first one with his what would become pretty much his backup band, Crazy Horse. So this is Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere. Now, this is probably one of his best known and most celebrated albums. Cinnamon Girl, Down by the River, Cowgirl in the Sand. Just epic, epic songs, live staples for his concerts for years. This is a fantastic album. Really, really good. Now, this is an essential Neil Young album that you do need to have in your collection. With the first one, I forgot to mention, and with this one, these were both original pressings. Pretty much everything I have of Neil Young from this time period are original pressings, and original pressings are pretty easy to come by. Just condition is definitely a big factor because these albums were played heavily. They were very popular. But yeah, you can find these pretty much anywhere pretty easily. But yeah, this is a fantastic album again. Cinnamon Girl, probably one of my top three Neil Young songs. So this is definitely an essential album. So the next one, I actually have two versions, is After the Gold Rush. Now, this and Harvest are probably his most celebrated, critically acclaimed albums. I prefer After the Gold Rush over Harvest in particular, but this is just this really just builds upon everything that Neil Young had kind of been writing with, everything before. This really showcased what a great songwriter he'd actually become, even so early in his career. The title track after the Gold Rush, Cripple Creek Ferry, Southern Man, When You Dance I Can Really Love. There is just so many hits on here. It's just amazing. I'd probably put this album at number 2 in my personal favorite Neil Young albums. So this is an original 1970 U.S. issue. But then I also got the reissue from the Neil Young original release series campaign. So I'm going to touch on that a little bit. You can tell by it has this little gold sticker on here. I'll show you. Yeah, so as part of the original release series, he's going back and re-releasing pretty much all of his albums. I think they're currently in like the late 80s, early 1990s right now. I think it's volume like 27 or 30. I mean, it was a lot of albums up until that point. But these are all, for the most part, especially the ones from the 70s, are cut from the original analog master tapes and mastered by, I believe, Chris Bellman. These are phenomenal. A lot of them are still in print. Pretty much, I think the whole catalog is still in print. Really easy to find. I don't think they're that expensive. I think they're under. Right now, they're under $50. I think some of them are going out of print, so they're shooting up in price. But I picked this one up for about $40. It's really, really good. Now, when it comes to comparing sonically how good these sound, this one definitely sounds a little bit cleaner, and it's cut a little louder, but still the original is still very, very good. My original is just a little bit in more rougher shape than this brand new one. So if you don't have any Neil Young albums and you don't want to spend a lot of time digging through record stores or meets or anything like that, and you just want good, clean copies that are all analog, just start with the original release series. You can get them from neilyoung.com. You can get them on Amazon. You can pretty much get them anywhere. And again, they're not that expensive, but they're great. After the Gold Rush, though, essential in any record collection, even if you're not a Neil Young fan. Now, this next one is pretty much one that everyone is probably familiar with. Heart of Gold and Old Man and the Needle and the Damage Done. This is Harvest. This was released in 1972, but I think recorded in 71. Commercially, I think this is his best-selling album. His only ever number 1 hit on the Billboard charts that he ever had, even to this day in his career, was Heart of Gold. It was his only number 1 hit that he had. This is a very, very good album. A lot of people put this one at their number 1. Now, there's a couple tracks on here that I'd be okay with if I never heard again. There's a lot of really great hits on here, though, too. So, essential in any record collection, probably, even if you're not a Neil Young fan. This is a fantastic album. Now, this next one's a little bit of a kind of an oddity. Now, this was Time Fades Away. Now, this was a live album that was released in '73 when Neil Young was recording was touring with his backing band called the Straight Gators. This is a fan favorite for a lot of people, me especially. I think it's really good, but Neil came out and said he really didn't like the recording of this album. It was a very long tour. It took a lot on him mentally and physically. So he's honestly never been a fan of this album. So I don't ever think it never got a CD official release, and it never got like repressed throughout the 70s, I believe. But now I think with the vinyl resurgence, there's been a couple reissues of this, which is great. These are all the songs on here are pretty much ones that were never put on an official like album. I don't think he ever really played many of these again, if I'm not mistaken, but really killer. It's really raw. It's not processed at all. It's not overdubbed or anything. It's just really raw Neil Young from this time period, and it's great. And I'm a huge fan of this album. You can find these pretty easily. I know for a lot of years they were really hard to find, but I really like this album. If you just really want to know hear some Neil Young stuff that really isn't real mainstream, I think this is really good for you to have. So this next one is On the Beach. Now, in many circles, this is what is referred to this or the start of as like the Ditch trilogy. So it's called that because these albums weren't released on CD for like years and years afterwards. Um, this is kind of a time period where Neil Young his songwriting really came up, but kind of like the themes of the albums were kind of like doom and gloom, which I really enjoy. So On the Beach is a really unique album to me. Like this was 1974, so a lot of political tension in the country. I believe this is right when Nixon resigned. So there's a couple shots at him in here, but again, it's not overdone or anything, and it's not tiresome. Um, Ambulance Blues on here is really good. Um, Vampire Blues. It's a really kind of like raw, dirty. It's pretty much something completely different than the previous releases that I showed you. Um, Although this album might not be for everybody, it's really good, at least to me, but might not be for some. Um, Essential, if you're a Neil Young fan, I believe so, but if you're just a casual one, um, not really. But if you want to delve into it, I would highly recommend it. So, a really good album here. Now, this next one is my all-time favorite Neil Young album. This is Tonight's the Night. This is pretty much Neil Young at, I want to say, maybe his lowest. Um, Not in terms of songwriting or anything, but just like mentally and just physically. Like he had lost a couple roadies and a couple of his good friends to drugs during this time period on the road. I think this album is dedicated to Bruce Berry, who I think was a roadie, and Danny Winton, who was one of the original members of Crazy Horse, but he died of a heroin overdose. Or both of them did, I think. But this is just the rawest Neil Young that you'll ever hear, in my opinion. I mean, this album just like sends a shiver up and down your spine. There's no other way to describe it. It's so raw, it's so emotional, it's so deep. It's just absolutely amazing. Um, Pretty much all I can say about it. He did release a couple live albums um, where he plays the entire the entire album of Tonight's the Night during those concerts. I believe one was live at the Roxy and Somewhere Under the Rainbow. I believe that was released as part of the archive series. Um, but again, this might not be for the casual Neil Young fan. This one goes really deep, and I think it cuts you with a knife. But I love it. It's my favorite Neil Young album, hands down. This next one is Zuma. Now, I actually was listening to this last night because it's definitely one of the top 5 Neil Young albums ever. This is not how the original cover came. It was actually all black and white. I'll put a picture up of it. I bought it, so whoever owned this record before, I like colored it in. So I mean, they actually did a pretty good job. So, but the big track on here is Cortez the Killer. Um, that's probably his most, like, one of his most epic songs that he's ever done. You got Barstool Blues on here. You got a Stupid Girl, Drive Back. This is a really raw, like, down and dirty album with Crazy Horse, so it's really, really good. One of my all-time favorites, but mostly everyone's gonna probably get this album for Cortez the Killer because it's such an iconic song of his, especially if you've ever heard him perform it live. It's really, really, really good. Um, I believe essential in any collection. Now, this next one wasn't officially released during this time period, but as part of the Neil Young archival release series, I believe in chronological order, this was the next one. Now, this was heavily bootlegged and talked about for years, and this is Homegrown. So I think this came out in like 2020, but it was recorded in 1975. There's a lot of tracks on here that would actually, a couple of them that would come out on later albums. Actually, let me take this out real quick. Yeah, so like Star of Bethlehem came out on American Stars and Bars later on. Love is a Rose, I believe, came out on American Stars and Bars. Actually, no, it came out on Decade, which I'll talk about that in a little bit. That's a compilation album of his. I really, really like this album. It's not for everybody, but it's a lot of solo acoustic tracks on here, a couple electric ones, but I really enjoy it. It was definitely one of his most talked about unofficial releases for a lot of years. So, but I really like this album. It's kind of rock country-ish kind of thing. Not exactly like Harvest, but kind of close. But I think this is really good. Still available in print. If you want to pick it up, I recommend it. The next one I kind of just touched on previously. Now, this is American Stars and Bars. This is a really, really good Neil Young album. It's not one of my favorites, but you got Like a Hurricane on here, which is one of his most epic songs. I'm personally not a fan of that song. I don't know why. I could just never get into it. I know a lot of people love that song. I kind of just don't, but this was him coming off of like that Ditch trilogy kind of time frame, kind of like just experimenting with different genres. He's got a lot of country, a lot of folk on here, a lot of electric stuff. So like Saddle Up the Old Palomino is a really kind of catchy tune. It's pretty good. Bite the Bullet is a really, really good hard rock song. Hey Babe, kind of like a country, kind of like twangy song. I really enjoy it. So this is definitely top 10. Um, Definitely within his catalog, but not one of my favorites per se. I wouldn't put it in the top 5, but it's in the top 10 at least. But highly recommended. Might not be for the casual Neil Young fan, but you never know. I didn't listen to it for a lot of years, and I picked it up one day and started listening to it, and I enjoyed it. So this next one is, I don't think this album gets enough love or the love that it deserves, at least in my opinion. Comes a Time is just a great, just mellow, soft rock, kind of like a Return to Harvest form album. It's just so, so good. Comes a Time, the title track, Lot of Love, that's on here. You got really, really just good songs. Going Back, Peace of Mind, Look Out for My Love. You just got really, really good tunes on here. Critically, I know this album was heavily praised, but a lot of people I don't think talk about this album, I think, as much as they should. It's just a really, really good Neil Young album. I think this is essential in any collection. I'd probably put this within my top 5 of his albums. It's just really, really enjoyable. You can pick it up anywhere. You can, as with pretty much all of these original pressings, like I said, you can pretty much pick them up anywhere. But a really good Neil Young album. All right, so the next 2 albums I'm going to talk about, they're kind of similar in the way, so that's why I'm showing both of them. But it's Rust Never Sleeps and Live Rust. Now, Rust Never Sleeps, most of it was recorded live. However, there were a couple that were recorded in the studio. I believe Pocahontas was one of them. But this was actually recorded live, but then heavily overdubbed in the studio. So it doesn't entirely feel like a live album. It does feel like more of a studio album. Some of the audience, like noise and background stuff, is kind of like heavily dubbed down, so you can't hear it. So it actually sounds more like a studio album, but still essential. My Hey Hey and Hey Hey My My Hey Hey is actually the acoustic version of Hey Hey My, if that makes sense. So the same song, one's acoustic, one's electric. Powderfinger, which is probably my favorite Neil Young song of all time, is on here. Pocahontas, Ride My Llama, it's a mixture of hard rock and like soft rock, so it's very, very, very good. Now, I bring up Live Rust as well because they were recorded pretty much at the same time period. This is a double disc, 100% live album. Again, essential. Both of these are essential in your collection, whether you're a Neil Young fan or not. He does a lot of his big hits on this one, like some of his Buffalo Springfield Day stuff, like I Am a Child. He does Comes a Time, Cortez the Killer, Powderfinger, Tonight's the Night. It's Cinnamon Girl, just hit after hit after hit on this song. It's like a greatest hits, but live. So these albums are definitely essential. They're both in my top 5. Let's just say that. Also, as part of the archive release series, there's a lot of live stuff he's releasing. And I have a couple to show you. One of his newer ones is Live Shakespeare. Now, this is the ones that I'm about to show you is all solo acoustic stuff from 70-71. Really, really good. This one I really enjoyed. This is right before he released Harvest, so this is the first time like this audience in particular here had heard like Heart of Gold and Old Man. He does a lot of his earlier stuff on here too. So this is a really, really good release. It was recorded really well. And the really good thing about the archival release series and the official release series, like I had mentioned with the After the Gold Rush version that I showed you, he's upfront with his mastering. So if you look on a lot of the back of these albums, he actually says the source right here. I know you might not be able to see it too well, but it'll say the source right here. So this particular one, the source was mastered from 192/24 digital. Now, that could be because the analog master tape was in really bad shape. They had to transfer it to digital, clean it up a little bit to make it sound good, which I'm totally fine with. I mean, that's totally cool. I only want to hear analog, but if something sounds good, really, really good digitally, I'll still buy it. So this is a really good album if you just want to hear Neil Young solo acoustic. The next one was from a year earlier. Now there's, again, a ton of these that are out right now, but I only have 3 of them. This was Carnegie Hall, 1970. Now this was a couple months before the Shakespeare one. So, but this one's a really big one. This one has 22 songs on it, so there's a lot of really good tunes on here. Let's see what's the mastering of this one. I believe it actually says it on the back. If it's not on the record label itself, it'll say it on the back of the album. All right, so this one was from the original non-Dolby Scotch 1-inch to ATR 1-inch 4-tape. Mixed and edited at Capitol Studio C from October 26th to the 28th of 2020. So again, he's really upfront with his mastering chain, the sourcing and everything. So, but this is a really, really good album. Most of the tracks on here are from Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, After the Gold Rush. Again, this was before Harvest, so he does a lot of these tunes on here. Now, this is probably the best solo Neil Young album that has officially been released. This is live at Massey Hall in, I believe it's Massey or Macy. I think it's Massey Hall in 1971. Again, this was right before Harvest came out. I believe he was still recording the album, but he wanted to showcase some of these songs. This is the best solo live acoustic version of Old Man I think you'll ever hear. It's very, very, very good. The audience is really engaged. He interacts with the audience, makes them laugh a little bit. So it's a really engaging experience. This album was recorded extremely, extremely well. I believe this is all analog, if I'm not mistaken. But it was recorded really well. The audience interaction is great. It feels like you're there. This is just an incredible Neil Young artist. This is one of the first ones that he released as part of the archive release series campaign, which I believe started in like 2006, 2007. This was one of the first ones that came out. I actually remember getting this on CD while I was out at a training exercise in Yuma, Arizona, back in the day, back in my early Marine Corps career, when I was a young Marine. So, but yeah, so glad to have this on vinyl. This is essential in any Neil Young collection. All right, so that covers my Neil Young collection. Within the next coming couple of weeks, I'm going to be wrapping up this series. I have a couple more artists to go through where I deep dive into their catalog and talk about it. So again, appreciate everybody subscribing to the channel. Thank you for getting the word out, and thanks for stopping by. See you all next time.